This is the OBSBOT Tail A, and it is a streaming PTZ camera designed for content creators, people who want to stream live video out into the world, or someone who's just looking for a high-end webcam for their studio. Now, this video is going to be an overview and a review of this camera from my personal perspective as a content creator. We're going to take a look at it in a bit more detail. I'm going to walk you through some of its features and capabilities, and then at the end I'm going to share with you my thoughts. Just to be clear though, OBSBOT did reach out to me and send me this over for free. They have not though paid me to make this video. They've not seen this video before it's been published, and as always my thoughts are entirely my own. Now, when you receive the camera, it'll come in this nice protective carry case inside the main box. When you open it up, inside you will find the main camera itself, which we'll take a look at now in a moment. You can see it's quite a large unit compared to, say, a smaller action camera, but there is a lot going on here, which we'll talk about in a moment. We then in the pack also have some accessories. So we have a USB-C to USB-C cable. I've already used it, hence the reason it's undone. And there are also some adapters included in the box as well. You've got this USB-C dual input. One is data, one is power to USB-C. And then you've got a USB-C to USB-A adapter included as well for the included charge cable, which is going to allow you to charge it or power it on a traditional USB-A. Now, the first thing you'll notice about the Tail A is the fact that it is a pan tilt zoom camera. So you've got your pitch axis up here. There's no roll, but you do have a yaw axis as well. It's not designed to offer stabilized footage. It's designed to allow the camera to pan and tilt and be able to keep you in shot when you're using it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Now, it is mounted to this quite large base on the front here. You can see there's some holes down here, which are the LEDs for the indication. But also as part of this, we've got all of the I/O located around the sides as well, which we'll take a look at in a minute. And there is also another port on here as well we'll take a look at too. Now, this is designed to be a portable webcam, but it offers a lot more than you would find on a traditional webcam. So starting at the sensor, we have a 1/1.8 inch CMOS, which has an effective megapixel count of 8.4 million or a resolution of 3856 by 2176. Now, it has what they're calling an 8-piece optical lens. That isn't a zoom lens, it's just that there are 8 optical elements in the lens itself, and whilst it doesn't have an optical zoom, it does have a 4x digital zoom. ISO range supports ISO 100 to 6400 and supports ±3 on the EV scale, and it supports both auto and manual focus. That 8-piece lens is f1.8 aperture, so it should let in a fair chunk of light, and it's got an equivalent focal length of 23mm. Now, inside this camera, there is a huge amount going on because it isn't just a webcam. For instance, it's capable of recording up to 4K 30 frames a second or up to 1080p 60, and it supports all the other frame rates in that down to 24 frames a second. It can both record and live stream at the same time. There's an SD card slot on the back for the DVR there, and it's capable of recording in both H.264 and H.265. H.264 up to 100 megabits a second and H.265 up to 80 megabits a second. Now, there is a limitation on this with regards to the recording and streaming bit rates. It can do both at the same time, but if you're recording in 4K, you're limited to streaming up to 1080p, or if you're streaming in 4K, you can record up to 1080p. There is also a huge amount of I/O built in as standard, so it has both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in, and you can stream video wirelessly via them. It has dual built-in microphones. You can also, though, attach an external microphone to it if you want to too, via the 3.5mm jack down there. And then if we spin it around to this side, there is also a HDMI output, which you can use at the same time as recording. And there's also a USB-C port over here for charging the built-in battery. Yes, there is a battery built into this as well, but that can also be used for attaching an external Ethernet adapter, and that can be used with the likes of NDI because this camera does support NDI via an additional license, and we'll take a closer look at that a little bit more later on. Now, as I did mention, there is a built-in battery in this base as well. It is a 1500 milliamp hour, 7.6 volt, 11.4 watt hour unit. That's going to allow an operating time, they say, of up to about 154 minutes whilst recording at 1080p 30. And that takes about 90 minutes to charge. And you can charge that via that USB-C port on the back on a standard 5 volt, 2 amp charger. Now, one of the real nice things about the Tail A is the sheer amount of I/O options that is available. You have the USB port and it can act as a basic webcam. You've got that HDMI output, but you've also got all that wireless functionality as well, including NDI. Now, in today's video, we're going to concentrate on NDI using it with external devices, but I am just going to give you a quick overview of some of the other I/O options that are available. One of the real nice ones is the fact that you can connect it directly to your smartphone via Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, allowing you to stream on the go whilst in the office, here in your studio, but also out and about as well via that built-in battery. Now, I'm just going to walk you quickly through the app functionality. The nice thing about this is you can connect directly from the camera to your phone. Now, I've currently got it connected via Wi-Fi, and if I move it there, you should now be able to see what I'm seeing on the view on my phone. Now, you can see it is currently tracking me, so if I move around, you will see that the gimbal will automatically move to keep me in view. This camera has a lot of options available. It has tracking features, AI auto control features in the sense of it'll automatically zoom in and try and keep you in the correct field of view as well. What's nice about it though is it also has a few pro style options in the sense of you have the option to control the program output. So for instance, if I click this little button on the side here, you can see here you've got the on-air output, which is the main output. You've then got the wide option, the auto option, which is automatically zoom in to keep me in view. And if I go down to here and click on that up there, you can now see what the camera is doing. That is the view that would be going out on the live stream. And what's nice about it is it gives you a full sort of broadcast station control via the app. Now, just giving you a bit of a basic overview. I'm not going to cover everything, but you can see up on the top right, you can see the audio levels from the built-in microphones. You've got the recording options down there at the bottom. Along the bottom, then we've got all of the control functions for the extra features. So for instance, if I bring that up, we've got manual control over the gimbal. As I'm currently tracking, it's fighting me. I'd need to turn the tracking off to use the manual control if I wanted to. If I then click on the tracking options, you can either do it automatically or manually select what you want it to track. So you can draw a box around the person or the device or whatever it is. So you can see there, I drew a box around my face and it's now going to track me. If I move over to the AI box option, this is some of the more advanced features with the camera. Will do things like automatically zoom to try and keep you in the correct field of view or keep you in the correct area of the image. So for instance, if I click on AI, you've got wide, auto or close up. If I click it on auto, it'll automatically control the program output to what it thinks. So if I now just put that up full on screen so you can see it. Yes, I do look a bit blurry now. The light in here doesn't help, but it's a digital zoom as well. But if I just move back, you will see what it will do is zoom in to keep me in view. I'll talk a bit more about the image quality and everything a little bit more later on. This camera does suffer a little under low light. My setup in here with the light is quite low and it is struggling a bit there. We'll talk about that though a bit more later on. You then have lots of other options. So you've got here the speed, so how fast it's going to react. And then you've got the tracking options as well that you can choose. Along then, on the side, you've got your other options for the camera. So as I said, you've got your program output options. You've then got your manual camera control, so auto or manual for the exposure, ISO, all of the usual stuff. You then got your playback to playback pre-recorded footage on your SD card. Then on the bottom, you've got these little dots down here, which are your main camera settings. Now, the first option at the top is the gesture control settings. You can fully control this camera via gestures. So you can do a shape with your hand to tell it to zoom, to record. I'm not going to go through it in this video, but it is all there available. Then if we scroll down, you've got the options for the audio. So you can select the built-in microphones, and then you've got the audio settings. So you can adjust the volume, the gain, the noise reduction as well. Down below that, you've got face autofocus, so it will actually autofocus specifically on a face. That is what it is doing here. You've got face auto exposure as well, and then you've got options such as upper and lower limits for your ISO, which is good to see. pretty much the same as what you'd find on any good camera. Then at the bottom, we've got our output settings. So we've got things like our UVC mode. We've got NDI options. That is what we're going to be concentrating on a little bit more later on. We've got our RTSP mode, as well as our media settings. The media settings is where you would set your frame rates for your streaming as well as your recording. So at the top, we've got our frame rate options, and then we've got our recording resolution and options, as well as our RTSP options for our streaming. So as I mentioned earlier, you can record in 4K but stream at 1080p, or stream at 4K or record in 1080p, and all the options for that are under here. And then you also have your HDMI output option as well. The situation with that is exactly the same. So if your HDMI is set to 4K, you can only stream in 1080p as well as the DVR. Then scrolling down, you've got some extra other options. You've got the tail ear settings. This is things for like the power on, the brightness, basic settings, buzzer, things like that. And then just scrolling down, you've got your SD card options, which basically gives you the option of formatting. And then you've got your factory default settings, feedback, and about device. Basically all of the usual stuff you'd expect to find in an app. Now what we're going to do next is take a look at using this camera with two different setups. The first is going to be with this YOLO Box Pro. This one doesn't actually support NDI. This one though has HDMI and USB inputs, so we're going to use that camera with that and see how it performs. But then we're going to take a look at bringing it into OBS via NDI as well. I do have an NDI license code for this. It is something that you do have to purchase separately, which we'll talk about a bit more later on. Now the first thing we're going to do is get it set up with my YOLO Box Pro. Now unfortunately, my Pro doesn't support NDI, so I can't show you the NDI feature on this. I'll show you that via OBS in a minute. What we can though do is show you it via USB, and we can also do it via HDMI as well, but USB is probably the quickest and simplest way to do it on this. Now if you're going to use USB, you are going to lose some functionality. You're not going to be able to record because we have to use the universal webcam feature that is built into the camera to do it. So what I'm just going to do is a quick setup to monitor mode on the YOLO box, and what we're going to do is plug in the USB port into the USB-A on the top there, and as you can see, nothing has been detected, nothing's been found. If I add a source, you can see nothing here shows up, and that is because it isn't currently being detected. Now I am currently connected via Wi-Fi, which you can see on my phone here. What I'm going to do though is go down to the settings. We need to enable UVC mode. Now this is the universal webcam mode. Basically, if I kick that on, it's then going to give me a warning, and then what we should see is any second, you should then see it kick in. Boom, it's been picked up by my YOLO Box Pro automatically, and that has now become the main source on the input. There, you can see that's now come up on the screen, and we now have that connection via the USB port into the camera and the YOLO Box Pro. You can still see that I do have my webcam view available. The idea of this isn't really to be able to see it, but I can use this as my control functionality for the camera. We're not going to have any control via the YOLO box here, but what I can do is go into my settings, so I can do things like, hey, draw a box around myself, enable the tracking, and do all the main controls for it via my phone as well. If we were doing it via NDI, we may have some additional control options. However, unfortunately, we don't when we do it this way. If you've not used the YOLO box before, you have lots of nice little options under here. So we can set our resolution. Currently got 480, 720p or 1080. I'm going to set it at 1080 because that's what we're going to use. We've then got our audio options along the bottom. So you can see there that we've got our audio input showing. At the top here at the moment, you're not seeing audio. That was working just now. I'm not sure why that isn't currently showing up. I might need to come off the full screen view. If we go under the audio settings, USB audio on, there we go. Now you can see that we've got the audio showing up there as well. And then I can go back to the full screen and show it to you that way. Now, as I said, you could also do it via HDMI. The YOLO box does have all of this I/O along the top, so you could connect it via HDMI if you wanted to. If you really wanted to be able to use multiple different camera inputs, though, the best way to do that is going to be via NDI. As I've said, the YOLO Box Ultra is the one that does support the NDI input. Unfortunately, though, that isn't something I can show you here today. Now, to use this on NDI, we have a number of options. You can either use the built-in Wi-Fi connector and then just power the camera via the USB port on the back, or use it via the built-in battery if you want to, or you can use this, their external network adapter. Now, as I said earlier, they do include this little adapter that does allow you to power and communicate with the camera at the same time. So if you were using it on a PC, for instance, but this adapter also has some features like that as well. So for instance, if I find my way into the box, haven't actually opened this yet, but I can see on the image, if we then take it out, wow, it's heavier than you'd imagine. We have the box that has our network interface input as well as a power input. So this allows us to power the camera as well as communicate over Cat5 at the same time. And then you've got a nice long cable on this as well, which is good to see. Didn't actually see how long it is. Does it say on the back of the box? It doesn't, but what I'll tell you is this. I'd call it 2 meters. It might be a bit over, but it's basically 2 meters, and that gives us a power input as well as our network input, which means you don't have to bring network cables right up to the back of the camera. We're going to plug that into there. I'm then going to connect this up to my power source and network, and then we'll get it set up. Now, to use NDI, you're going to need an additional license. This does cost £79 in the UK. It is available as an individual, but you can also get it in multiple packs from OBSBOT as well. To install the NDI license on the camera is simply a process of going into the main settings, find NDI, click activate, and type in the license code that you were provided by OBSBOT. Once you've done that, you then should see the NDI option as activated. You can then proceed to add the camera to your system. Once the license key is activated on the camera and you've enabled NDI, you can then go into OBS. You need to make sure that you do have the NDI plugin pre-installed. If you do, you simply click on the source, add the option, and then if we look here under source name, you can see that my camera has shown. Once selected, you should then see that video input appear. You then have all of the other options available, like the bandwidth options, frame sync, some experimental stuff, and there's even the option to be able to control the pan, tilt, and zoom within OBS as well. If I then just click OK, that then has been set as a source within OBS. Now, when using this camera with a PC, you have an app available called OBSBOT Center that allows you to have all of the controls like you saw on the app earlier. This console allows you to have all of the basics. So again, it has the options for recording, the tracking options available, AI mode, camera and gimbal controls. We've got the image settings allowing you to set things like profiles, white balance, and all of that is available in here as well, including all of the recording options. This camera also supports HDR as well, and that option is there for you. There's some special beauty modes if that's something that interests you. And then you've also got all of the basic camera setting options down here as well. Along the top, you then got some quick options such as the ability to turn on and off preview, power options, as well as virtual camera mode for devices where you don't have the ability to install drivers. Now, the real nice thing about using NDI is the fact that it will drag in lots of different sources without the need for HDMI adapters, USB cables, and it's just a far more smoother and streamlined way of bringing the camera image into either a piece of hardware such as the YOLO box or bringing it into your software like OBS. Now, at the moment, the image you're seeing here is the standard image settings for the camera. As I did show in the software, you do have manual control over the options. We've currently got it set to auto white balance, and I've currently got it set to standard image profile. For instance, the studio here is a little bit complicated for cameras. I dial my cameras in manually when I set them. This is what you're seeing is the camera's dedicated straight images. For instance, if I move over to custom, there you should see things come to life a little bit more. I've increased the saturation a little bit, although things are looking a little bit red. If I then just go into the white balance settings, there we can scroll through. Tungsten, oh no, we definitely don't want that. Fluorescent, that was pretty close. I think that's pretty good under fluorescent because we are under a lot of LED lighting. It's not quite right that, but it's pretty close. And then below this, we've got the custom camera options that I can set. I'll set it back to auto there a little bit. I've got the saturation up a little bit too much there, so I'm just going to drop that back there. Probably drop the contrast down a touch. Sharpness is okay. Let's just have a look at the hue. That's going a little bit yellow, so let's drop that back. I think that's getting pretty close there. I'd have to compare it to my other camera, and actually we're looking a little bit red on that. There isn't any dedicated controls for the individual colours that I've seen yet. I do need to, though, have a bit of a poke around because I do tweak my cameras with regards to that. I think I've definitely upped the contrast a little bit too much. Let's drop that down there. But as you've seen, there is a lot of manual controls as well. It is quite low light here in the studio. I will go through the footage quality a bit more later on in this video. The first thing, though, I wanted to show you was getting it actually connected. Now, just to demonstrate the audio recording quality on the Tail A, what you're hearing at the moment is my studio audio. What I'm now going to do is move over to the Tail A internal audio. This camera has 2 microphones built in. It's not designed to be the best in the world, but it'll give you an idea of what the audio sounds like. This is just giving you an indication of what it would be like in real world use. You do, though, have that 3.5mm jack on the side. You can use it with the likes of the Rode Wireless Go or the DJI wireless mics. That's a good option if you do want a proper mic input. However, it's just to give you really an overview of what it sounds like. There is also a microphone built in. In fact, I think there's more than one. I will double check that, and you're hearing the audio from that right now. I've actually got a separate mic attached to me, and you can connect an external mic to it if you want to, but I'm using the internal mic on it at this moment in time, and I'm recording the external audio on my phone. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is image quality. What you're seeing here is my studio camera, which is a Panasonic G9 on a 17mm prime lens, almost wide open. And the reality is you're not going to get this level of image quality from even this kind of webcam. However, that isn't to say it isn't able to deliver some good results. I want to demonstrate it both here in the studio as well as outside and share with you some thoughts around that. Now, I'm just going to switch over to the Tail A. That's what I moved over to now. It's just sitting next to my Panasonic. The field of view is different. However, you will notice that the image quality is quite different as well. What I have noticed with this camera in the lower light that I've got here in the studio, sorry, you might have seen it vibrate a little bit then because I put my arms on the desk, whereas my other camera is isolated. It does tend to go a little bit soft in low light. It isn't as sharp as I can get the image on the Panasonic. That isn't a sharpness setting. What I found with the Tail A is in lower light, it does soften up very quickly. However, get it outdoors or get it into some really decent light and the camera does actually look very, very good. What we're going to do next is move over from the studio and take a look at what it's like in some outdoor conditions. Okay, so I'm just out and about with the camera in some very bright conditions. Now I've come into this shaded area here. I've adjusted the exposure manually on it now just to try and get it dialed in for me. As you can see, we're blowing out the sky at the moment as a result of that. The audio exposure does struggle a bit in these conditions from my testing. If I stick the audio exposure on, if I just do that as I'm recording, switch to auto, you will see that it really does darken me down and it adjusts the exposure for the scene behind me. I have got face crop exposure turned on, so I was expecting it to do a little bit better than this. But if we then go back to manual, there you can see that's got it roughly where I would expect it to be looking at the screen on my phone. What we do also have, though, is HDR mode, and that's what I have turned on now. So that is the same exposure settings you've seen just now, but with HDR enabled. You can now see that sky in the background has come right down. I'm looking okay. I think it's going to be fine. I'm going to have to check it in post, but you can definitely see the difference. I've still got it on tracking, so if I move around, it will still follow me around. But that HDR mode really comes into its own when you're in conditions like this. What I have found playing with it is to get the most from HDR mode, you do want to use the manual camera settings. I've been playing with the HDR mode in the normal camera settings and it doesn't do a great job, if I'm honest. It only seems to be when I move it into manual settings and I tweak it just to get it right, I'm able to get the best from this HDR feature. Next, I just want to show you a little selection of footage that I've taken on this camera, all recorded at 4K on the onboard DVR, out and about, just giving you an indication of how it looks, but also some of the tracking features as I was testing it as well. Now, one last thing I just want to show you is this camera on an indoor setting in an environment like my workshop. And what's actually really cool about it is it will follow me around, and it actually will make a really handy sort of B-roll or A-roll camera where you don't have a second person with you actually following you. Now, it's currently set to tracking, so if I wander over to the P1S from Bamboo, it's going to follow me over. At the moment, I've got the tracking speed set to normal. Could set it to fast. That'll make it sort of less smooth, a bit jerkier, but faster to react. The only downside to this, obviously, is if I move over to here, if I just move my chair out of the way, it will follow me, but what you're not getting is any zoom. You're just getting the camera move around. What I can, though, do is put it into auto mode. So if I just go into the AI options and auto, it's then going to track me and try to keep my face like you see there in view. I have set the exposure to manual right now. It might look like I'm a little blown out simply because of the lights above my head. I have to do it in manual because there's multiple different light sources in here and they all run at slightly different frequencies, and I basically have to set the shutter speed manually to 50. But now if I move over to here, it'll follow me over to the Bamboo, and it has changed the field of view. It thinks that is going to be the best one, and now it's zoomed back in. This is obviously going to be based on what the software thinks is right to do, not necessarily what is the right thing to do. But then I can move over to here and it's going to follow me over, and it seems to sort of zoom out when you move, and then at some point it's going to probably zoom in. There you go. And when I stop, it's then going to zoom in and bring it back in place. If I chuck it back into wide, we can also sort of control it via the program features as well, like I showed earlier. So again, if I go into the program mode, what we can do is jump between the different modes. So I've chosen wide right now. We're then going to move over to the P1S, and then I'm going to go, you know what? I want this as a close-up. So there you've got the camera that's punched in. That's then giving you that sort of traditional punched in view. We're then going to go back to wide, so we're back onto the full workshop, and I'm going to walk down to this side here where it's following me, and again it's going to keep me nice and in view. The real good thing though is if you're doing bench work and stuff like this, so if I just sit down, it's going to follow me down there, and I am using my phone to see what it's doing. It is going to be really handy in a situation where I'm doing work on the bench down here, and then I can look up at the camera, but what it is going to do is follow me around. So if I do need to pop over to here and grab this soldering iron, this is the new Accent T380. I did a review on this about a week ago. Interesting, some of the feedback from people on it. I actually think it's a really good soldering iron for the workshop, but I'm just going to place that over there. And then I'm going to come in nice and close again, and you're going to get that sort of top-down view. I could definitely bring the camera lower down if I wanted to. That way then you'd have a bit of a better view of what I'm actually doing here on the bench. And also it'll allow me to sort of track around the workshop too. So again, it depends what you intend to do. It depends what your use case is, but it does give you quite a few options. And this use case for me personally, I think is very, very interesting. Now I've just moved it over to the side just to give you another view. And this time it sort of shows the workbench a bit better than it was earlier. Yes, it is a right mess right now, I know. But again, this would just give you a view of me doing work on things. So for instance, if I get under the microscope here with this receiver, it is an FR Sky receiver, don't hate me. But it just gives you an idea of the kind of stuff you can do with it. And then again, it just gives you some freedom to move about without worrying if the camera's actually following you. So as you've seen, this camera can look very good with plenty of light. Where it does tend to struggle, even though it's got this nice optic set on the lens, is in lower light, and it's just not able to deliver the sharpness that you can get on the likes of a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. Okay, so to share with you my thoughts on the OBSBOT Tail A. Now, I'm going to give you my perspective as a content creator. I don't generally review cameras. I've done it now and again, but this is as someone who uses cameras all of the time, but more than anything makes content. Now, let's get a few things out the way. This is quite an expensive product. It is priced with a lower end DSLR or mirrorless camera. It is priced in such a way that it is much more expensive than most webcams, but it has so many more features than most webcams. In fact, it has more features than you'll find on most mirrorless cameras or webcams, and it definitely sits somewhere between the two. It has an incredible amount of I/O, HDMI, Wi-Fi, USB connectivity. There is pretty much nothing that you can't connect this camera to. And if you're looking then for a more professional streaming setup, you do have that NDI option as well via that additional licensing. That is incredibly handy if you want to set up a lot of cameras rather than have loads of wires around. You can do it all over network or Wi-Fi like I was on this, and have that all coming into something like the YOLO Box Ultra or OBS via the NDI plugin. The image quality of this camera, whilst in good light, is good enough. It is better than any other webcam that I've used, not quite up there with mirrorless cameras. Get it outdoors, it looks very, very good indeed. Get it in a well-lit studio or office, it's going to look fine. Where it really struggles though is in this environment that I'm in here today. My studio is actually quite dark, surprisingly, and it just goes soft very, very quickly. It's not actually that it's that noisy, it just gains a lot of softness. Also, the color profiles on this for me are not quite there. I cannot dial this in like I like to dial in my main studio camera. I'd like full manual control over RGB. That for me would be an absolute brilliant option. That would just mean I can tweak it to how I like it. I'm still playing with the settings. I can get it close, but it just doesn't quite look as good as I can get my mirrorless camera. In the end, what I think this is really good for is a office camera, portable streaming platform, or a second camera that you need to track you around in your studio. It has so much that it can do with regards to its app functionality. You can stream via a YOLO box, you can connect it to your smartphone and stream directly if you want to. There's just so many different options available to you. I can really see people being interested in this and multiples of these as an NDI option. As you've seen outdoors, it does look really good on things like sporting events and stuff. I think it's going to be a cool option too, especially with the pan and tilt functionality. If you're looking to get yourself a camera like this, it is the best that I have seen from a webcam point of view. It's not quite mirrorless level, but it is as close as you're going to get in this style and platform. And if you're interested in getting one, there will be a link to it in the description. I don't think it's particularly cheap. I don't think it's particularly expensive. I think you're getting a lot of camera for the money. You just have to decide if the payoffs are worth the trade-offs in the sense of low light image quality. The payoffs though, NDI, easy configuration, smartphone compatibility, huge amount of I/O connectivity. Now, that is it from me on this one. I really do hope you found it interesting. If there's anything I've missed, anything you want to know, please do put it in the comment section below. I want to say a big thank you to OBSBOT for sending this over. Really, really interesting product indeed. If you'd like to support the channel, there are links to Patreon as well as Buy Me a Coffee in the description. I want to say a huge thank you to all of my Patreons. We would not keep making content on this channel without your support. And if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content like this in the future, please do consider checking it out. So, that's it on this one. Stay safe. I will speak to you soon.